Welcome back, Richard. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Interesting topic today.
Yeah, over the past month or two, we've done a number of podcasts kind of focusing on and talking about emotions and feelings and how to deal with it. We had a couple of podcasts where we talked about self-regulation. In our last podcast, we talked about attribution and how do we handle emotions and how we react to other people's behaviors and what we attribute it to. And so today we're sort of continuing that conversation a little bit, not specifically about attribution, but we're talking about how do we deal with frustration and from a neurological perspective, we refer to it as increased neurological arousal.
Right.
But how do we deal with that, and what are some of the best strategies for managing that?
Yeah. We've been on this topic of self-regulation and calming ourselves and one week we talked about, you have these feelings and you have to be careful about your response to those feelings. Last week we talked about attribution. People say and do things that elevate our arousal, and we attribute motives and intention to them. And we need to be careful with our feelings that we're identifying them correctly and that we're attributing the correct motives to other people. In this process, we accidentally bumped into this article. It's from a literature that we don't typically access. We accidentally bumped into this article by Eric Rawls in a publication called Earth. It's a website, earth.com. And the title of the article is Venting Doesn't Reduce Anger, so psychologists advise patients to do this instead. And this struck us because most people in our profession continue to advise that you get rid of your anger, that when you feel yourself getting aroused, getting angry, especially anger, that you release it in some way. This idea, and it's been around for a long time, this idea that getting it out by screaming or by punching a pillow or by running around the room. We advise parents to do this with children, say, well, no, scream into a pillow. Sort of these old wives' tales, that
Right.
this is sort of handed down from generation to generation. Go punch a pillow, scream in, punch a punching bag, run around the block, go outside, ride your bike. And when you dissipate the anger, when you get rid of all your anger, when you purge the anger, then come back in. But there's increasing evidence that the opposite is true.
Right.
And instead of getting it out, instead of releasing it with some physical activity or by screaming or by doing other highly aroused behaviors, that the best approach is to what we call get to calm. Get your
Right.
body to calm. Okay.
Yeah, I think as we were preparing for this, I think that the first thing that it led me to think about is we did a podcast a long time ago on paradoxical therapy, and that is, we use it sometimes with OCD or anxiety, where we'll say, instead of fighting against your anxiety or your obsessive
Mhm.
tendencies, identify a time where you do it, where you can think about your anxieties or where you can perform those obsessive compulsive tendencies. And but it gives you this opportunity to act it out. But the purpose behind that is to think about why you're anxious. Think about why you're doing these things. So when you thinking about anger, why am I angry? If you just act out and you just throw all this anger out and you scream into a pillow or you're punching things, you're not really dealing with what's making you angry.
Right.
You're
Mhm.
just releasing this energy that you have in your body. And, I can completely appreciate that, but you're not dealing with what's really making you angry.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
getting some of the things we're going to talk about today for getting to calm is helping you actually deal with the anger, not just the energy that you have because of that anger.
That's right. Right. Um, Based on what we know this advice about get to calm, maybe the best approach is get to calm. Based on what we know about the human nervous system, we think that this is advice worth considering. That it's probably a good idea. This all is based on a recent study. It was a research group from Ohio State University. It was led by Brad Bushman. He's a professor of communication at Ohio State, and they published the original research in Clinical Psychology Review. And the article that we posted in our show notes is an explanation of the study. It's not the study itself, but it's an explanation of the study. And actually, it was a meta-analysis, and we've talked about meta-analysis before on the podcast. A meta-analysis is a study of studies. You get a bunch of studies and you put them all together, and then you reanalyze this collection, this larger collection of data. In this case, Bushman and his group analyzed 154 studies
Yeah.
involving 10,000 participants. So that sort of size gives you statistical power that you don't get by looking at a single study with, say, 20 people in it.
Right.
Okay. So it's a study of studies. And what they concluded after analyzing all these 154 studies is that venting anger, while it sounds like a good idea, is probably counterproductive.
Right.
Because what you want to do when we talk about how the nervous system works, their review shows that activities that lower body arousal, that lower your bodily responses, such as deep breathing, mindfulness, and you've all heard about deep breathing exercises and mindfulness and meditation, and even yoga, consistently push anger levels down. And that's the goal
Mhm.
if we're going to reduce arousal. When you're angry, you have elevated arousal. What we want to do is reduce that arousal, not give vent to it, because that probably is going to make it worse or make you more angry or make you more aroused. What we want to do is send you in the other direction.
And what's terrific is what their study suggests is that this is true for all groups that they looked at. So whether it's children, whether it's males or females, whether it's, different cultural backgrounds, whatever
Mhm.
the group, this perspective holds.
Right. That's
It's
right.
true for everyone.
Right. And now, just so a little bit of neuroanatomy here, we have a two-part nervous system when it comes to anger. One nervous system produces fight or flight, and the other nervous system reduces fight or flight. Okay. So we have the sympathetic nervous system, which, when it's activated, it leads us to fight or flight. And then there's a parasympathetic nervous system that brings us back to normal.
Right.
Okay.
And they
So
work together. They work
yeah,
in
think
concert.
about those two things that you elevate sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. And then when that's done, you bring your body back to normal by activating the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
Okay.
And so we don't always want to be in fight or flight. And so normally what happens is something happens and our sympathetic nervous system is triggered and we elevate, our heartbeat increases, our respirations increase,
Mhm.
a lot of things change in our body and it prepares us and then activates fight or flight.
Right.
What we hope happens is very, very quickly that
Mhm.
shifts, and the parasympathetic nervous system kind of works to bring everything back to homeostasis.
Right.
Um, in a normal, typical scenario, those things work in concert with each other again, and they happen. It happens very quickly, and everything is back to normal.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't, and that leads to other problems, but that's what we want to happen.
Right. And this is all part, these two things, the it's part of the autonomic nervous system. It's working sort of behind the scenes. It's a tab that's
Right.
left open and the program is running. It's happening automatically.
Mhm.
Okay. And you get elevated and then you reduce the elevation, get elevated, reduce the elevation. The other thing to remember when it comes to arousal is as your brain approaches fight or flight, And particularly if it goes into fight or flight, when you get this blind rage or blind response, when you tip all the way over to fight or flight, blood gets shunted from your brain to your body
Hmm.
because now you want all the energy in your arms and core and legs so you can fight or run away.
Right.
When the blood gets shunted from your brain, you're you're not thinking clearly. And that's why when you start arguing with somebody, um, and you sort of don't know what to say, you get tongue-tied, and then you get to your car or you get to another place a few minutes later, and oh, I should have said this, or I could have said this, or I could have said that. Well, the reason that happens is that in the heat of the argument, blood is leaving your brain, and
Mhm.
you're not quite as articulate, you're not quite as thoughtful. But when you calm down and blood returns to your brain, when it gets shunted from the muscles and goes back to the brain, then you're thinking clearly and you say, oh, I could have said this and I could have done this and I should have done that. And so you want to make decisions when all the blood is back in your brain. Okay. And so be careful with fight or flight because as soon as you start heading into fight or flight, blood is starting to get shunted and you're not making good decisions. Your decision making isn't as good.
Right.
Okay.
So our goal in what this study talks about is our goal is that we want to calm that sympathetic nervous system by activating the
Mhm.
parasympathetic nervous system. We want to, activate the calming side of things, and that will help bring down the
Mhm.
activating things. And so what we have learned through, neuropsychological studies and various research is that activities that or increase the activation of our parasympathetic nervous system. Things like taking long, deep breaths, as you were
Mhm.
saying, or another strategy is like tensing your muscles and then relaxing them. Sort of that systematic process of tensing and relaxing. All of those types of behaviors, those types of strategies increase the activation in the parasympathetic nervous system
That's right.
to
Mhm.
reduce that activation that's leading to fight or flight, as you were just talking about.
Yeah, and I'm never sure, and I will have to do more research about this, but this idea of breathing, the lengthening your exhales, you there's a famous one, you increase to the count of four and exhale to the count of six, where you take a long time, or this idea of tensing your muscles and relaxing your muscles. If you are engaged in some effortful activity, you're going to begin to focus on that rather than whatever made you angry. So, part of the reason this stuff works is it quite literally takes your mind off the anger, off the situation, off the words that you hear, off the behavior of others, and it begins to focus on that. And once it focuses on that, you begin to activate. Once you leave the anger pit and you start to focus on something else, you begin to activate the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
And that starts to bring you back. Okay.
Well, and I think that the other thing that it does is, sometimes, and we talk to patients about this often, when a patient has problems with anger, one of the things we try to do is have them pay attention to what's happening in their body when they're
Right.
angry.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people have a hard time recognizing that. So, they know that maybe their heart rate increases, or they know that they start getting sweaty, their hands start getting sweaty or something. But but they may have a really difficult time recognizing that their body's getting really tense, or that
Right.
they're breathing faster and they're
Mhm.
huffing and
Mhm.
puffing and doing those kind of things. And so I think bringing specific attention to those things, and instead of just letting your body stay tense intentionally, and we did a podcast not long ago about intentionality, uh,
Mhm.
intentionally tightening and then releasing those muscles puts you back in control over what your body's doing.
Right.
And when you're back in control of what your body's doing, you're going to start calming down. Some of those sympathetic nervous system responses are going to start to calm. And that's
Right.
the goal.
Yeah, it makes me think of those years ago. There used to be these survival shows, like why some people survive airline crashes or other events. And one of the reasons is that some people can stay calm even during highly aroused situations, like an
Right.
accident or some kind of disaster, and they're able to overcome that and stay calm. I always think of Iceman in the first Top Gun movie, where he just stayed calm, and
Right.
he was able to do things because he could remain in that calm state and not get highly aroused. Whereas Maverick was always highly aroused, the
Mhm.
Tom Cruise character, always highly aroused. Um, so lowering the arousal by lowering our arousal, however we want to do it, and we're going to talk about some ways to do that, gives your brain, especially the front of your brain that is making decisions, it gives your brain an opportunity to think about consequences, to think about things that, don't do this because remember the last time you did this, you felt stupid. The last time you said that, the last time you screamed at your kids, or the last time you screamed and threatened your spouse, you regretted it. So it gives your brain a chance to think about all that and to choose your words more carefully. And one of the most fascinating tidbits, and I call it a tidbit, from this article was that scientists, people who study this stuff, comparative psychology, scientists think that this quick reset, this ability to shift quickly to get yourself to calm, evolved over time so that groups of people living in caves or living in little villages. Think of cultures like Native American cultures or cave cultures or these small groups of people who were beginning to cluster together. This ability to quickly reset evolved to let social groups resolve conflicts before somebody got hurt.
Right.
Because if you stayed in this elevated state of arousal, you're eventually you're going to you might hit somebody, you might throw something at somebody.
Right.
And so we developed this capacity to regain control of ourselves so that we could function in groups.
Right.
Yeah,
And not a topic for a different podcast, perhaps, but when we don't get to when a person doesn't get to calm fast enough, that's what leads to a lot of the chronic health conditions that we have because our
right.
body doesn't function well when it stays in that heightened arousal state for very long. So, but
Yeah.
again, that's for a different podcast. But let's talk about some strategies that people
Yeah.
might consider to help bring themselves to calm instead
Mhm.
of expressing all of that anger and screaming and hitting and doing all that kind of stuff to get the anger out. Some strategies that people can use to manage their anger by bringing that energy down. And one of the things you mentioned it a moment ago, but there are a number of apps available that encourage and help guide people to better ways to do that deep breathing.
Mhm.
You mentioned inhaling for the count of four and then exhaling to the count of six.
Mhm.
Some good studies have shown that doing something like that can reduce your heart rate within a minute.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it can help start to calm that sympathetic nervous system down pretty quickly within a minute of starting that.
Right. That's right. And that's one way to do it. And people say, well, that doesn't work. These things don't work for me. Give them time because everybody's nervous system is a little bit different. So it might take somebody 30 seconds, it might take you 50 seconds, but eventually these things will work. Okay. Yoga is another thing you can do. Yoga is it focuses your attention on your breathing and on your body space and all that. So that again would be a good way to do it. We've learned, you talked about progressive muscle relaxation, where you tense and release. And we did an activity in graduate school years ago where the professor took us through this progressive muscle relaxation, starting with our head, going down to our feet. And he was really good at it. And by the time we were done, I was never so relaxed in my life. I mean, he really was masterful. And if you do 2 cycles of progressive body relaxation, that'll get you back to calm. And it doesn't take that long. I mean, we're talking about minutes. So you say, well, I need drugs. I need something that acts fast. These things act very quickly, right?
Right. There's also a lot of apps and I always hate and not hate. I'm also always hesitant to recommend specific apps when it comes to mindfulness and meditation and things like that, because my experience and my personal experience is that, different apps are going to work for different people. And I don't know why.
Mhm.
I don't know why one app is better for some people and another app is better for other people. The voice, the guided voice that is in sound the same just about with all of them, whether it's a male or female voice, they all sound pretty similar. But I don't know what it is about some apps that work better for some people and the others that work. But just doing a few minutes of mindfulness can be really helpful. If you find yourself getting agitated or upset, using an app to do a mindfulness exercise or a meditation can help. Or just one of my favorite, I was just talking to a patient this week about, when you start feeling yourself getting agitated like that or upset like that, just pause for a second and look around the room and find six things that are pink, or find six things that are blue, or find six things. I don't know why I'm sticking with six, but it could be any number of things. Find six things that start with the letter Q in the room, and it takes your mind out of what's exciting everything, and it makes you more mindful about what's happening right now.
Right. Hmm. This going for a walk, we say be careful because you want to do things that calm, and sometimes a walk can be too arousing. But when you walk around the block, you should walk at a pace where you can also have a conversation.
Right.
So if you're gasping for breath and you can't talk, you're walking too fast. So walk at a pace where you can have a conversation. So you're walking slowly and pay attention to your surroundings. And that's exactly what you just advised, is that look around, look at the trees, look at things intentionally so that when you're on your walk, you're actually doing two things. You're releasing some of that energy and you're doing the mindfulness exercises that we advise people to do.
Mhm.
So, Bernie, you've used some of those apps, right? Calming
Yeah.
apps?
Hmm.
Okay. People tell me that when they use them, they work for a while and then they stop working, which I think is fairly common. Okay, you sort of get used to it, but you can keep switching, right, from
Yeah.
one to another. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much the specific thing that you're doing or that it has to be the same thing all the time. I think it's just the act and process of doing it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I know a number of people who have several apps and they just kind of rotate through them, do different things on different days or for different
Right.
purposes,
Mhm.
and I think that's just as effective.
Yeah, and we talk about the kind of meditation, whatever meditation works for you. I mean, there's no right way to meditate.
Right.
Some people, I mean, I have a hard time sitting still I couldn't I would have to train myself to meditate for 10 or 15 minutes because my mind starts to wander. Okay. But I can meditate for 1 minute and I can do that several times a day. So whatever meditation works for you. Some people pray. I have people who use prayer as a form of meditation, which is exactly what it is. So it's whatever meditation works for you
Yeah.
and whatever kind of walking works for you and whatever kind of gentle motion works for you. So look for strategies that are effective for you, that work for you. They tell you not to run, but when I was a runner, when I ran every day, if I went out for a run, I felt great.
Yeah.
Okay, I got rid of all my tension. So for me, running did work. So it's whatever works for you. Do
Mhm.
it, set it up so that it works for you. And remember, there's there's two parts to this calming. One is how do you calm in the heat of the moment?
Mhm.
We call that acute care, okay? And then there's long term that you should meditate or walk or calm yourself on a regular basis so that you stay in that and you keep showing your brain what calm looks like.
Right.
So it's two parts.
Right, absolutely. Because the more aroused you are on a regular basis, the more
Yeah. Mhm.
elevated your neurological system is on a regular
Mhm.
basis, the easier it's going to be for you to get to that tipping point.
Right.
So
Mhm.
keeping yourself at a more calm level is
Mhm.
important. So, just our recommendations are, how to find the ways that you need to learn to teach yourself how to get to calm. Like you
Hmm.
said, what works for you is what you need to do.
Hmm.
And again, with calm, we're working on decreasing that sympathetic nervous system
Right.
activation, not expressing anger through yelling or hitting or anything like that. When you were talking about running, most of the time, and not always, but most of the time, my guess is that you were running on a regular basis.
Hmm.
So what you were doing was you were sort of keeping sort of the maintenance of your stress levels and
Right.
neurological arousal levels lower. You weren't
Hmm.
necessarily, you know what, I'm really angry because somebody did this at work, so I'm going to change clothes right now and go for a run. You weren't doing that. You weren't running at that specific moment. You were running as a way to sort of as a maintenance, just to keep things lower. So you got to learn what works for you and use that on a regular basis and teach it to others. Teach it to your kids.
Right. Teach your children how to get, don't send them out, don't have them screaming into pillows. Teach your children how to get to calm. It's
Right.
one of the most important things you can teach your children, and yet most of us don't do it.
Right. And work with your partner. If I want to talk to my partner when I'm getting upset about something, especially if it's something that she did that is frustrating to me or something. Wouldn't it make sense to talk to her about that? Hey, when this happens, this really upsets me. Not when I'm angry, I'm not going to do that. But once I get to calm, say, hey, when that happens, it really bothers me. How can we avoid that in the future?
Right. Yeah. Work with your partner to get to calm and stay to calm. Okay. So, two other things. Remember that different circumstances will produce different levels of arousal. So, not all arousal is the same. Some is easy, some is more. It's very easy for me to be patient with my new granddaughters. Okay.
Mhm.
It just doesn't bother. I mean, I'm far more patient with them than I was with my own children. Um, so different circumstances will produce different levels of arousal. Some you can deal with, you can use your strategy and it'll work very quickly.
Uh-huh.
Others you have to work a little bit harder or a little bit longer if it's really important to you.
Well, and remember that also that the other side of that coin is that different circumstances are going to produce different levels of arousal depending on what else has happened.
Yeah.
You just said that it's really easy for you to have patience with your granddaughters, but even that level of patience varies depending on the rest of your day.
And
If you have
how,
a really rough day at work, or
Mhm.
if there's lots of other things happening and going on around you, that level of patience may be shorter than it would be if it's been a very calm day.
That's true. So you got to keep that stuff in mind. You have to, that's what I mean by mindful, being more mindful of situations and your bodily state. Okay.
Absolutely. The
The
second
second thing,
thing
yeah, go
I
ahead.
think is so important, Richard, and it's something that we cannot overemphasize because it is it's something that we work to teach patients every day. And that is the sooner you activate your calming strategy, the better. If
Mhm.
you just let it go, if you don't have good enough insight to recognize I'm starting to get agitated, I'm starting to get upset, I'm starting to get frustrated, let me do something to bring that down. The
Right.
longer it takes you to start using your calming strategy, the
Mhm.
harder it's going to be to use it because
Right.
the your sympathetic nervous system is like a freight train. Once
Right.
it starts picking up speed, the harder it's going to be to slow down and stop. And so
That's right.
you got to catch it early in the process.
Right. The earlier you get it, because if you keep letting it build up speed and velocity, the longer you wait.
Hmm.
So best to catch it early. We had a situation yesterday with my granddaughter, and she was really full of herself for some reason yesterday and doing everything we didn't want her to do. And if I catch it very early, then it's very easy. I can take her outside and everything's fine. If we let it go too long, then she has everybody in an uproar. Okay. So the sooner you act, the better, because you don't want that fight or flight train to get too much velocity, because then you're not going to be able to stop it and bad things are going to happen.
Absolutely. So Yeah, as you mentioned before, there's a link in the show notes for the article that we pulled a lot of this stuff from, but definitely encourage you to look more into different apps and different strategies that you can use. There's loads of them out there, uh,
Mhm.
but find what works for you and try to start using that and see if that can help you better manage some of those emotions. So, all right, well, that is it then for today. Until next time. Stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.